Oh, it's sure fun to watch all of you joining us right now. I see the numbers growing at the participants part at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we are very glad you're here. This is great. Come on in. We've got all kinds of wonderful people joining us tonight. This is fantastic.
And even us.
Well, it's a given that it's wonderful, but perhaps it shouldn't be. I am extra grateful that you said yes and are joining us this evening. So yes, I would be remiss if I didn't. Greg Marshall says, best looking Brady Bunch ever. We love you, Greg, and we thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All righty. Thank you, Marshall. Oh, Marshall's watching from New York, and I know we have some folks from Dallas, and let's see if Jack and Jane are with us tonight in Seattle. They may not be here yet. This is just wonderful. You know, there's a lot most things are wrong about this COVID tide we've been in for so long now. But one of the small bonuses is how we've been able to connect this way. It's not the same as the real thing, but I love that people from across the country we can pop in with them. And when we did RFK, it was pretty fabulous to have the playwright surprise join us for our post-show discussion that day from New York. So
Scared the bejesus out of me.
I'm sure it did. Yes,
I would not expect that to happen this evening.
I'm just saying, you know, I would not put anything past him. That's right. That's right. Well, this is wonderful. We've already got over 100 people joining us. Oh, we've got someone writing in from Pearland. It's her third BYOBard. She has, bless you, Jessica, you have 3 kids you're keeping at bay. So we understand. And if you have to pop up and pop back on, we will still be here. This is great. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to join. And then we will get started. We have a full docket for this evening, and of course a very special video to watch that has never been seen before and was made just for this event, which is pretty fantastic. So and then of course the extraordinary performances that I know are coming. So this is wonderful. Our numbers are growing, which is great. Why don't we, Becky, do you want to go ahead and bring us all together here, and we'll be chatting for a couple minutes before we start the video, so those who are still joining should still be able to get in on the beginning of that. But Becky, why don't you take us away?
Thanks, Shannon. Welcome, everyone. I just want to make sure I'm not muted. We're so pleased to work with our partners at Rienzi. We've had a great collaboration over the last few years, and we love everything that they do. They were particularly helpful when we produced the Book of Will. Those of you who have seen that production of ours and know that it was about the creation of Shakespeare's First Folio. And yeah, the Rienzi happened to have the Second Folio, and we all got to see it, and it was so inspiring for our artists. So tonight, we're happy to present some of those artists and some new artists that were not in that production, and really looking forward to celebrating Shakespeare's birthday with Rienzi and with all of you. So I'll turn it back over to Shannon.
Absolutely. The other actors joining us tonight are from our other The Book of play, our most recent production, The Book of Magdalene. So we're very excited to have Pablo and Jennifer joining us from that cast as well. And yes, I certainly echo everything that Becky said, and this is pretty fantastic. And Scholars aren't 100% sure of his date of birth. They do know April 23rd was the date of his death, but they know he was born really close to around this day. So this is the day that Shakespeare's birthday is celebrated. He would be 457 today. And as we've been saying, we think he looks pretty good. So it's quite remarkable that that someone's work would still be moving the world so very much. And that certainly is because of the incredible humanity he captured. But lest I go on too long, I'm very excited to introduce you to Ryan Hernandez, our friend and colleague from Rienzi. She was as John and Joel were reminding us, is the one who literally opened the book for us when we went for our very special field trip. It was an extraordinary experience when the cast and some of the designers and Becky and I got to go. And so Ryan is going to tell us just a bit about Rienzi. If you haven't been, when the world reopens, you must go. But she's going to tell us a bit about Rienzi and then introduce the video to us. I did just want to note briefly, some of you who saw Book of Will and were coming for the post-show discussions we did may recognize John Evans in the video. He is the head librarian at the Museum of Fine Arts. And he came to speak to us after one of the performances, and he really dove in, and they created this video just for us. So with that, Ryan, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan. It's very wonderful to be here with the cast again. It's lovely to see all of the actors again. I did pull the book out, and it was a wonderful moment to see so many actors enthusiastically run towards the book the way that I felt the first time I saw it. I will say Rienzi is actually open to the public right now. So you can go, you can visit the house. We have cell phone audio guides. You can buy your tickets at our website, mfah.org/Rienzi. Thank you, Shannon, for dropping the link. So please come out and visit. The image you're seeing behind me is the library. This is just a small taste of what's in the house. As you can tell, a prolific book collection, and Mr. Masterson was an English lit major who loved Shakespeare. And we're going to find out a little bit more about how we found the book in the collection, because it was a bit of a mystery. And John Evans, our head librarian, helped create this video for you today to help us celebrate Shakespeare. So I'm going to go ahead and get it started for you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Hi, I'm John Evans, Chief of the Library and Archives here at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. I'm here today at the home, or the former home, of Harris and Carol Masterson, a home that was donated to the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston in 1999. It now serves as a house museum for the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. And we're thrilled today to be sharing one of the treasured objects from the museum's collection and one of the treasured objects from Rienzi, which is Mr. William Shakespeare's Comedies, History, and Tragedies, informally known as the Second Folio, published in 1632. It was first published in 1623, shortly after Shakespeare's death. But there are a number of reasons that this is really considered one of the most canonical works in Western civilization. We think of it right up there with the King James Bible, but for this work, it is one of the preeminent works of Western civilization and certainly Western literature. And why is that? There are really two reasons for that. One is we think about preservation, meaning the preservation not only of this book, but the preservation of Shakespeare's works. William Shakespeare, as many of us know, was an active playwright in the early 17th century. He produced on the order of 38 plays that we have in his canon today, but 36 of those were actually included in what was known as the First Folio, again produced in 1623, posthumously after his death, and then gathered again in 1632 for this beautiful second edition. The second issue is an issue of what I would call elevation. Mr. Shakespeare's work was actually elevated to a higher status because it was produced in a grand folio edition of this scale. Most books in the 17th century, certainly books about plays or documenting playwrights' scripts, would have been produced in a much smaller scale, what we would consider a quarto, a smaller publication that might be equivalent to today's paperback that you might put in your pocket somewhere. This, of course, is a much more lavish edition, something meant for an elite class, something that you could have had at your home and had time to enjoy and review at your leisure. So it takes on two meanings for us in that it's a deluxe volume, but it also was preserving Shakespeare's legacy, his language, his wit, the sense of universality that he created with his characters, and the beautiful humor and language that he had created over the course of his varied career. So there were a number of things that were important to the second edition, which is there were about 1,700 different editorial editions or variations that were corrected from the very first edition. So we'll talk more about that as we look more closely at the book. But before we do that, I want to say a little something about the Rienzi Library. As you can see behind me, we have a beautiful library here that is really what I think of at the center physically of the beautiful John Staub building that was built here in 1952, and then the additional wing that was built later, but also I think at the kind of heart of Rienzi in many ways. This was a room that was used for socializing. It was a room that actually hosted many parties and events. We see many wedding photographs that were taken here. We also happen to know that it was Harris Masterson's favorite room in the house. So we can imagine him sitting back here, perhaps in one of his wing chairs, reading, perhaps perusing his own Shakespeare Second Folio. The other thing is that the collection itself is about 2,300 volumes. So it's quite extensive and actually extends to other rooms throughout the house. But the focus of that collection is quite diverse in many ways, but is focused on works of English literature, and the strength are on English dramatic works. So let's take a look at the book itself, because each book, as we often know, takes on kind of a life of its own. It's an object unto itself. So if I take it out of the cradle here, we can see that it is, once again, a beautifully crafted book. It's in what we would call full leather, so leather on the back side, the spine, and on the front. It's in what we know as Moroccan red leather, so it's been dyed this beautiful red, and also it has this, what we call straight grain, a grain across here that was created during the tanning process. It also has some beautiful gilding elements here. There's some embossing that's taken place here through some stamping, and then a gold leaf was then applied over that to create a really luxurious binding. If we turn it to the first, what we call end papers here, we can see that there's some beautiful marbled end papers. Again, another sense of the deluxe nature of the book. But we get what is the first taste of some other history for the book. When we look at books, we're often looking at their history of ownership, what we would call provenance, which is very important in the museum world. So here we see it's by, there's what we call an ex libris, or a book plate, that denotes that it came from Viscount Mercy at Bignor Park. Now, Viscount Mercy was actually the second Viscount. A Viscount is a member of British nobility, above a baron, but sadly below an earl. And Bignor Park is in the south of England, in Sussex. So we know that the second Viscount, Charles Bigham, actually purchased Bignor Park in 1926. So we know that this book came from his library at one point and gives us a little bit of a taste of its history. Bignor Park is one of the great British estate and had a library. So we turn then to one of the end papers, and we also see another bit of detail that's important to us, which is a binder's stamp. It says, bound by F. Bedford. Now we know that Francis Bedford, through some research, was an important English bookbinder in the 19th century. He was a binder between 1850 and 1883, and was considered among the finest bookbinders of his period, according to the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. So it's interesting to note that the book, of course, is a 17th century text, the text block, but the actual binding itself is a 19th century binding. would have not been uncommon in the 17th century for one to go buy their book and then take it down the street somewhere or around the corner to actually have it bound. But this was bound much later in a very elegant style, very much in keeping with the grandeur and the importance of our text here today. So we see on this page, which is of course the title page, which is a very iconic image of William Shakespeare, and then we have a facing statement here called "To the Reader," and some initials that look like BI, but it's actually the initials for Ben Jonson. And Mr. Jonson is actually commenting here a little bit of a conceit, suggesting that the image of William Shakespeare is not quite sufficient. But what one should really look at is his pictures, or excuse me, at his book rather than at his picture, which is actually the lasting legacy that others should pay attention to. So we see here a bit of marketing going on here. We know that the two key figures that were critical to making this production happen after Shakespeare's death in 1616 were his two compatriots at the Kingsmen, John Hemmings and Henry Condell. They were friends, they were fellow actors, and they were individuals who wanted to make sure that Shakespeare's legacy continued on, not only just for his own sake and legacy, but also to make sure that the plays were done correctly, authoritatively. And they would have been in a position as actors in Shakespeare's troupe to really know, having spoken his words and addressed those to audiences, they would have had the most authoritative means to do so. But here they actually put Shakespeare's text in a grand scale. They put his name very large. That sense of cult of personality is already developing here. And for people interested in Shakespeare, we tend to hang on every bit of information because there's so little known about William Shakespeare. In many ways, he's a very enigmatic figure. There's very little historical evidence. But pieces like this tell us a little bit more about him and certainly about his friends and those in the early 17th century. We also see that it says, published according to the true original copies, the second impression. Again, this notion of veracity and authenticity. We need to keep in mind that in the early 17th century, publishing books and intellectual property are different than they are today. Copyright, as it were, was given over not to the individual author and the creator as it is today, but is actually given over to the printer and the publisher. So the people that actually owned the plays would have taken those, would have registered them with the Stationers' Company, which was established in England in the 16th century, and they would have taken it there to register that so that no one else could print those works without their permission. So we see down here at the bottom, it was published in London, printed by Thomas Coates for Robert Allett. Robert Allett's name is important because he actually had the rights and the permissions to more than half of the plays that were featured here. So of those 36 plays, Mr. Robert Allett owned more than 18 of those plays. There was a syndicate or a grouping of 5 different rights owners, and each of those got an allotment of books that were printed. Each of the editions for the first folio, we believe, was on the order of about 750 books, of which 220 odd are extant today. And the same is probably true for the second folio. About 9 years later, in 1632, this edition came out due to the success of the first one, and probably about 220 are in public libraries today or in research libraries, and certainly there's still some out there in private hands, but likely again suggests that on the order of 700 were published. But those would have each been sold and distributed by the rights owners. They would have gotten an apportionment according to the number of works that they actually had the rights to. So the other thing we should talk about here, of course, is the grand portrait of Mr. Shakespeare. And one of the things that is so striking about this is the scale of that. It's about 2/3 of the page. Very unusual to see a portrait, certainly of a playwright, on the title page for a work like this. Again, speaking to the closeness and proximity of Shakespeare and the legacy that he would go on to have. We know that the portrait was actually produced by Martin Droeshout. Droeshout was an emigre with his family from Flanders. They emigrated to England because of religious persecution. They were Protestants and came here for that reason. And we can see that it's not exactly a flattering portrait. Shakespeare is balding, he's got a little bit of stubble there. So in many ways, again, we see that his friends are trying to make sure that they get an accurate portrayal of their friend. And so today we believe that this is one of two kind of contemporaneous or accurate depictions of William Shakespeare close to the time that he was alive. And certainly, again, they would have been in a position to know what he looked like and wanted to make sure that there was an accurate and faithful rendering. We also know that there were 3 states done of this particular engraving. So states are basically additions or slight subtle variations that might be changed or altered for later impressions. An engraving like this would have been cut with a burin, basically a tool cutting and engraving into metal, and then that plate would have been inked and then printed. So that printing, the notion that later states or revisions were made suggests again that the authors were interested in making sure that each of the kind of subtleties, whether it's the glint in his eye or the change in the doublet or something in his color, would have actually been important to them to make sure that they get every element just right. One of the other things of note about this book, when we look at the book as an object, is the fact that there's a tear in the sheet. And when we come closer, we can see that there's a tear that runs all the way from the top here, down this way, and comes over to the side. But it's been very expertly repaired. So it's entirely possible, although we don't know for sure, that Francis Bedford, again, the binder of this book in the 19th century, may well have been what they considered an expert mender. Today we would consider that the work of a conservator. But someone has very expertly repaired that tear so that it is very much less noticeable today to the naked eye. But again, a piece of history here about the copy here at Rienzi. So then we turn to the ensuing pages. There are a number of pages. This is a tribute from John Hemming and Henry Condell to the kind of patrons. There were some underwriters who helped underwrite many of Shakespeare's plays and some of the production here. And then we actually come to a letter that they've written, and they want to say to us 2 things in their letter. One is, again, about the completeness of the work. They want to reinforce to us that this work is the most complete, and it is not like those quarto editions that other actors may have been spuriously printing to make cash for themselves on the side. Many of those other printings were not very authoritative. They certainly would not have had the access to the scripts and the knowledge of those scripts in the way that Hemming and Condell did. The other thing that they want to suggest here, secondarily, is the accuracy and authenticity of that work. So they wanted to both have a complete record, but also they wanted to have an accurate record of those plays. And so both of those were very important to them, and they state as much in some of their opening letters here. The other thing that's notable about this particular work is that it features, for the first time in the 2nd edition, not in the 1st edition, but the work of John Milton. Milton, as many of you will recognize, was the famous playwright for the epic poem, Paradise Lost. And this is the first time that Milton is printed anywhere during his lifetime. He was 24 years of age when the 2nd edition came out. He would have been about 16 years old when Shakespeare actually died in 1623. But it's a very beautiful homage to Shakespeare here, and I want to read just a few of those lines for you. This is called On Shakespeare, and what needs my Shakespeare for his honored bones, the labor of an age in piled stones, or that his hallowed relics should be hid under a starry pointed pyramid? Dear son of memory, great heir of fame, what needst thou such weak witness of thy name? Thou in our wonder and astonishment has built thyself a living monument. And he goes on to say, and here's the last line, that kings for such a tomb would wish to die. What Milton is essentially saying here is that no grand monument is necessary for Shakespeare. His monument is this book and all the plays that lie within, that ultimately lie in the hearts and the minds of the readers. And what king would not want such a legacy for themselves? So I think a very beautiful and fitting tribute for Shakespeare that, again, first time for John Milton featured in print, and only here in the second edition. There are a number of other tributes, but we turn here then to a page that actually features the names of the principal actors in the Kingsmen, which we think is a great document, again, listing those figures and then also talking and speaking to the import for Shakespeare and for his fellow actors, their significance in the production of his plays. So it wasn't just about the scripts, it was more about the carrying out of those for live audiences. And we see some of the great names here, of course, John Hemmings and Henry Condell, but we also see the great Richard Burbage here. And we see in this list William Shakespeare himself, who was also a member acting in his own productions. We then turn to what in essence is called the Catalogue of all the comedies, histories, and tragedies, for us which would be more like a table of contents. And it lists here the 36 plays that are featured by their individual genre. Of course, we have first the comedies, then the histories, and the tragedies. So it lays out for us in these groupings each of the plays that readers will then come to find within the text. So the next kind of 900 odd pages to follow includes all of those works, each with a kind of beautiful decorated header here, the title, and then a double column page of script there, even with the stage directions featured in italics. And so we have many of the greatest works, again, of dramatic arts ever to be produced here. We have the works of Macbeth, we have the works of King Lear, we have the Tempest here, and so forth. So again, just a beautiful production. The other thing I should note is that we can see that every element of the page is used, very little space left over. And obviously when you have a 900-page book, they were looking to actually maximize. The paper itself would have been among the most valuable elements of the entire printing process. So using that was very important. We look at a work like Ben Jonson's work. The predecessor to this, Ben Jonson, a great contemporary, friend, and sometimes competitor of Shakespeare's, produced his own folio work in 1616 called The Works of Ben Jonson. That also was produced in a grand kind of folio style. It was truly the first to do so, but that book had wider margins in it than we certainly see here in Shakespeare's text. So it was even a kind of more luxurious treatment in some ways. So the other thing I should say is a little bit about the other folios. There were some other folios produced. As I mentioned, this is the second folio. There was a first folio, arguably the most important of the folios, but there were two others produced in the 17th century. One produced in 1663-64 that introduced some other plays. Unfortunately, 7 other plays were produced. Only one of those is now considered in the Shakespeare canon. The other 6 were unfortunately works that are not attributed to Shakespeare and considered part of the Apocrypha. There was a 4th edition produced in 1685. That edition more or less repeated the same works produced in the 1663-64 edition. So what that tells us about this second edition is that this tends to be the version that has come down to us today, and that most scholars, most actors, and other playwrights look to when they want to understand Shakespeare in his most complete form, if you will. Lastly, I think one of the questions that we all would ask is, how did this book come to be here at Rienzi? And it's a good question, and one that we don't necessarily have good answers to. Unfortunately, after Mr. Masterson passed away in 1997, we didn't learn that this actually was here for about another decade. It was just on the shelves in the library. The library hadn't been fully cataloged, and at that time when we did so, we were astounded to see that this was not only here, but also that it was not a facsimile, of which many have been produced over the years. But we believe that two things are possible. One is Harris Masterson served in the military. He was an intelligence officer in World War II and was stationed in London, England. Of course, that would have been one of the great centers of book publishing, but also the London bookstalls were famous for having great treasures there. So it's possible that Harris Masterson picked it up when he was there. He was really at that time in his life developing a broader worldview and certainly looking at art, and perhaps his passion for collecting was solidified there. The other possibility is that it came to him later. Mr. Masterson was very active in a variety of business interests, one of which was called Westmoreland Imports. And that was actually an antiques and interior design studio based here in Houston. And so he would have brought imports of things from across the continent and throughout Europe here to Houston for decorating homes here in Houston. It's possible through his connections there, and perhaps with a little bit more assets for himself, that he may have purchased this at that time. We simply don't know. But what I will say is that we're thrilled to have a copy of what we believe is one of the great works of Western literature here at Rienzi and here at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston.
Well, that was marvelous. Please do thank John for us. You should email him as well. But what pure joy to get to delve in. And even though we can't be that close, actually, this is probably closer than any of us would be able to get.
I was going to say, it's probably one of the few moments where we've actually photographed this in a way that people can see the inside in such a close manner. And I should note, John is working very quickly to try and produce lots and lots of photographs for our website, and we'll be sharing that at our website probably by the end of next month. So,
oh, fantastic!
More to see.
Okay, well, let us know, and I'll send the word out to everybody on our list who might want to check that out. So, thank you so much, Ryan. And now I think it's extra marvelous that the Second Folio includes a list of the actors in Shakespeare's company, because of course, first and foremost, Shakespeare would want his plays performed. And so with that, what better way to honor him on his birthday, I think, aside from delving into his some of the earliest of his published works, than to bring some of his words to us tonight. Thanks to the extraordinary actors who are joining us, who are donating their time and their talents, and I cannot thank you all enough. So Andrew, if you want to put, Andrew Ruthven, I should say, who many of you know is working behind the scenes tonight, and we're very grateful for that. Why don't we put, do we need to put people in the green room, as it were? We're going to welcome first to our virtual stage this evening, Pablo Bracho, who we're thrilled to have back with us. We were so excited when he was available to do Book of Magdalene. And he is going to give us some of Henry IV Part 1 this evening, a bit of hotspur from that. Pablo, do you want to tell us a little bit about why this piece speaks to you? And if not, that's okay. We can dive in. But is there anything you want us to be thinking of or to know that speaks to you as you get ready to jump in?
Well, when I was looking for pieces to perform for auditions specifically, a friend of mine told me you ought to look into Hotspur's texts, and so that's how I came about. That it speaks to me in a certain level, and so yeah, I can relate to some of the things that he mentions in here. So.
That he mentions. All right. Well, with no further ado, take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you. My liege, I did deny no prisoners, but I remember when the fight was done, when I was dry with rage and extreme toil, breathless and faint, leaning upon my sword, came there a certain lord, neat and trimly dressed. He was fresh as a bridegroom, and his chin new reaped showed like stubble on at harvest time. He was perfumed like a milliner. And twixt his finger and his thumb he held a punset box, which ever ended none. He gave his nose and took it away again. Whether with angry when it next came there, took it in, snuff, and still he smiled and talked. And as the soldiers bore dead bodies by, he called them untaught knaves, unmannerly to bring a slovenly, unhandsome course betwixt the wind and his nobility. With many holiday and lady terms he questioned me, demanded my prisoners in your majesty's behalf. I then, smarting with my wounds being cold, to be so pestered by a popinjay, out of my grief and my impatience, answered neglectingly, I know not what he should or he shouldn't, for he made me mad to see him shine so brisk and smell so sweet and talk so like a waiting gentlewoman of guns and drums and wounds, God save the mark. And telling me that the sovereignest thing on earth was parmigiuti for an inward bruise, and that it was a pity, so it was, that this vile saltpeter shall be digged out of the bowels of the harmless earth, which so many a good tall fellow had ravaged so cowardly. And but for these vile guns, he would himself have been a soldier. This bold, unjointed chat of his, my lord, I answered neglectingly, as I said, and I beseech you, let not his report come current of an accusation betwixt my love and your high majesty.
Oh, the fiery Hotspur. Have you ever played the role, or it's just been with you for a while, as often our audition monologues are? I have some of those myself.
I have not. It's not a play
doesn't
perform a lot, and so no. The only time that I had a chance was when the Houston Shakespeare Festival did it, and no, I didn't have a chance.
It wasn't meant to be. Well, I'm glad that it was meant to be this evening, because your passion is very clear coming through. So I thank you for that very much. And now we're going to move from Henry IV, part 1, on to Henry V. We're going to welcome Rutherford Cravens to our virtual stage. Ruddy, you've seen on our stage many, many times. We've been very fortunate. And in one of our earlier bards, he did an unforgettably hysterical duet. And this evening he's chosen a bit something different, but I'm wondering, many of you may recognize Oh for a Muse of Fire, which Ruddy's going to give us. But Ruddy, I know you had a specific reason for wanting to do this piece tonight. Do you want to tell us a little about that so we can be thinking of that as you're setting the stage, as it were?
Yeah, it's kind of Shakespeare's humble brag about the limitations of theater. And it's those very limitations are what make it so uniquely wonderful. And it reminded me, as I was working on it, of a Main Street production called Men on Boats, where some really wonderful designers, a brilliant director, and a stunning cast of actors recreated the first expedition down the Grand Canyon.
Yes.
And it was just extraordinary. But the wonderful, what the speech is all about is that for theater to work, you can give Steven Spielberg a few $1 million, and he can give you Agincourt. But in theater, you have to engage the audience. We have to engage and become complicit. And it's that wonderful interplay between the stage and the audience that's so valuable to me.
It is to me as well. And it's something I love that Shakespeare notes that, and I love that he wants the audience to help create the story in our minds. So anyway, without further ado, why don't you take us into the world of Henry V?
Good luck. Oh, for a muse of fire to ascend the brightest heavens of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Oh, then would the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. Well, pardon, gentles all, the flat, unraised spirits who have vowed to, on this unworthy scaffold, bring forth so great an object. Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? May we cram into this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt? Gentles, pardon. Since a crooked figure may in a little place attest a million, let us, ciphers in this great account, on your imaginary forces work. Suppose within the girdles of these walls are now confined two majestic monarchies whose high-reared and abutting fronts the perilous narrow ocean parts asunder. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts. Into 1,000 parts divide one man, making imaginary puissance. When we talk of horses, think you see them, printing their proud hooves into the receiving earth. For 'tis now your thoughts that must deck our kings, carry them here and there, jumping o'er time, turning the accomplishments of many years into an hourglass. Do we supply, admit me, chorus to this history, who prologue-like humbly pray you to gently hear and kindly judge our play. Many of those words were written by Shakespeare.
Well, some of them I'm quite sure were, and I was thinking as I knew you were going to be doing this, I will never forget sitting in the wooden O of Main Street Theater on Times Boulevard, watching you in our production of Henry V with Prague Shakespeare Company. And there is something extraordinary about realizing, and this is to me the incredible gift of Shakespeare, it's all in the words and in the acting and in our imaginations, and we can be inside a wooden O that has two poles and use them to the best of our ability and be transported utterly, as I know I was watching you in that production. So I am so glad that you wanted to do this tonight. I think it's why 457 years later we're still having conversations like this and still producing his works. So I thank you, my friend, for sharing that tonight. Thank you. Okay, let's go from one field to another. We're going to invite Jennifer Wang to the screen tonight. She was, in fact, Len in the Book of Magdalene, most recently here with us. I'm so glad you could be part of this evening. And I know, but I would like for you to tell us why you have chosen this particular monologue of Portia's from The Merchant of Venice.
Thank you. So I have also not been in a full-length Merchant of Venice, and it's a difficult play for many reasons. But I think the Portia character, she's so cunning, and she has so many layers to her. So I was already attracted to that. And then this particular speech, it's just very fun. And she's also talking about a role she'll be playing in the play, and I found that kind of meta aspect very entertaining. So yeah.
Fantastic. And as our sole female actor tonight, I'm particularly excited to hear this one too. So please, when you're ready, take us to Portia.
They shall, Nerissa, but in such a habit that they shall think we are accomplished with that we lack. I'll hold thee any wager. When we are both accoutred like young men, I'll prove the prettier fellow of the two, and speak between the change of man and boy with the reed voice, and turn two mincing steps into a manly stride, and speak a phrase like a fine bragging youth, and tell quaint lies, how honorable lady sought my love, which I denying, they fell sick and died. I could not do withal, and then I'll repent and wish for all that I had not killed them, And 20 of these puny lies I'll tell, that men shall swear I have discontinued school above a 12-month. I have within my mind 1,000 raw tricks of these bragging jacks, which I will practice.
I love it. I love it. And I am reminded, of course, that back when Shakespeare was creating all of this, there were no female actors. Of course, it was men. And in this case, men playing a woman, then playing a man, as Shakespeare was wont to do in many of his plays. But certainly that adds to the comedy of it all. But I love that you brought that. She's cunning. She's also so grounded. She's always struck me as such a grounded character in Shakespeare, and she has to hold down a lot as sole heir and all those sorts of things. So I'm grateful that you brought her to our virtual stage this evening. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you for letting me.
And now, gentlemen, I believe you will remember as one of the two that John Evans, librarian at the museum, was mentioning quite many times this evening. Dwight Clark, along with Joel Sandel, were something of the dynamic duo who helped save Shakespeare's work in the Book of Will, which we produced a couple of years ago. So Dwight, if you will join us. Hello. Dwight is going to give us, we don't very often get to hear King John, the play King John. Tonight, you're going to get to hear two different offerings from two different characters in King John, which I love. I love that we can have, that there's just so much to explore. There's always more to explore in Shakespeare. So tell us a little bit about Louis, the Dauphin, and why you wanted to do this one tonight.
Well, I mean, I have to admit, I've done this before, so I was familiar with it. But
that's, I mean, perfectly acceptable.
how often do you get to kind of reprise something that you're 30 years too old for, right? So,
absolutely.
No, I had such a great experience with this show, and it'll be 20 years this summer since it was done. And Joel was King John, and Ruddy directed, and I understand Debs Ramser is out there, and she was our stage manager for this.
All right.
Production. But this piece, it was my first experience being out at the Miller Outdoor Theater, and this character is, well, this particular passage is really about speaking truth to power. And it comes at a point in the show where England and France are in a war, and a large region of it is being supported by Louis, the young prince, and he's probably about 22, 23 at this age, and historically the same. But he was urged to take on this war with the promise that he would have support of the Holy Roman Emperor, and then come to find out he is then manipulated into backing down, and this is the point where he's just going to say no. Okay. He's he was born into a station of power, but he's someone of higher power is coming down on him, and he doesn't
have it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that, when you're ready, please take it away.
Let me take out my gum. Your Grace shall pardon me. I will not back. I am too high born to be propertied, to be secondary at control or useful serving man and instrument to any sovereign state throughout the world. And your breath first kindled the dead coal of wars between this chastised kingdom and myself, and brought in matter that should feed this fire. And now 'tis far too huge to be blown out with that same weak wind which enkindled it. You taught me how to know the face of right, acquainted me with interest to this land, yea, thrust this enterprise into my heart, and come ye now to tell me that John hath made his peace with Rome. What is that peace to me? I, by the honor of my marriage bed, after young Arthur, claim this land for mine, and it is now half conquered. Must I back because that John hath made his peace with Rome? Am I Rome's slave? What penny hath Rome borne? What men provided, what munitions sent to underprop this action? Is it not I that undergo this charge? Who else but I, and such as to my claim are liable, sweat in this business and maintain this war? Have I not heard these islanders shout out, Vive le Roi, as I have banked their towns? Do I not here have the best cards for the game to win this easy match played for a crown? And shall I now give o'er the yielded set? No. No, on my soul, it never shall be said.
Oh, speaking truth to power is, when it's genuine, is always moving. And I love God. I'm embarrassed I don't know King John better, but you know, hearing it's the fire and the passion, but the groundedness again of no is remarkable. So thank you very much for giving us that this evening. We'll get back to King John in just a little while, but first, something that we saw in the gorgeous video from the museum. We're going to have a little bit of the Tempest this evening. John Feltch, whom you will also remember from the Book of Will, who played Ben Jonson. And I don't know if they mentioned this, if John mentioned, the other John mentioned this in the video, but I thought I saw it off to the side, but Rienzi also has it's a first folio of Ben Jonson's at Rienzi. It's pretty extraordinary. So we welcome our own Ben Jonson now to the stage, of course, John Feltch. And you're going to give us a bit of Prospero. Is that, tell us why you chose this one.
Well, apart from the fact that I find it very beautiful, there are certainly amongst theater people, actors, there's a particular sentiment attached to The Tempest as Shakespeare's last solo work. He did go on to collaborate a little bit more before his death, but this is seen very much, especially the speeches I'm doing tonight, as a kind of valedictory and a farewell from Shakespeare to the theater and to the audiences as well. So it feels extremely poignant and beautiful, and certainly self-referential. There are scholars that argue that Prospero is not a kind of substitute for Shakespeare, but I don't particularly buy that myself. I think it's highly autobiographical, and Shakespeare was a magician.
Yes.
And that's part of what I love about the play.
I love that. I love that you phrased it that way. Okay, well, take us to his island.
Ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves, and ye that on the sands with printless foot do chase the ebbing Neptune and do fly him when he comes back, you demi-puppets that by moonshine do the green sour ringlets make, whereof the hue not bites, and you whose pastime is to make midnight mushrooms that rejoice to hear the solemn curfew, by whose aid, weak masters though ye be, I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea and the azured vault, set roaring war. To the dread rattling thunder have I given fire, and rifted Jove's stout oak with his own bolt. The strong base promontory have I made shake, and by the spurs plucked up the pine and cedar. Graves at my command have oped, and waked their sleepers, and let them forth by my so potent art. But this rough magic, I here abjure. And when I have required some heavenly music, which even now I do, to work mine end upon their senses that this airy charm is for, I'll break my staff, and deeper than ever did plummet sound, I'll drown my book. Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have's mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true I must be here confined by you, or sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardon the deceiver, dwell in this bare island by your spell, but release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free.
It's so glorious and it's so humble. Because I mean, now I can't hear anything but Shakespeare when I hear that, and when I hear you give it. And of course, there are also sort of hearkenings back to Puck in Midsummer.
Yeah.
But this is sort of the more mature, grown up, aware of where he is in the world, but also hearing you talk about hearing the mention of the book, of Prospero's book of magic. I wonder if Shakespeare ever had any idea, I don't think he did, that 450 years later that we would be, I mean, that 130 some odd people would be gathered from across the country during a global pandemic to celebrate him and learn more about that book tonight, as we are right now. And so I'm very grateful that you gifted us with that tonight. Very fitting for his birthday, I think. Thank you, John. Well, to close us out this evening is a face you are very familiar with. We were talking about RFK before the show started tonight, and he's taking off his Bobby Kennedy hat to give us Arthur from King John, whom Dwight's character mentions in his piece. But Joel, I'm wondering if you will not only tell us a little bit more about who Arthur is, but what you told me about this particular monologue.
When I was an acting student at the American Academy in California, we were in what we called styles class, which was where we studied Shakespeare basically. And I had not necessarily distinguished myself to any degree. I was good. I was studious. I did the things I was supposed to do. And my teacher, Karen Hensel, I credit her really for kind of making me an actor in one single moment. She assigned this piece to me, and the day that I had to perform it, she sort of surprised me. I didn't know. She had sort of on the sly told 4 of my classmates that on a given cue, they were to take me by the arms and force me to the ground.
Oh.
And then she took on the role of Hubert, which is the character I'm addressing in this monologue. And she had a pen in her hand that she held very close to my eye. And at any given moment, I mean, in her face, I was not looking at my teacher anymore. I was looking at Hubert, who looked like at any moment was going to take my eyes out. And she would come in, in parts of the monologue. And I really thought that, shit. But what I did in that moment, as opposed to breaking, I stayed in the life of the character and used what I was feeling to fuel the dialogue. And I knew in that moment, I said, oh my God, I knew I was being good. I thought, this is what it is. This is good work. And so that was a real turn on. So I was like, oh my God, this is like,
this is it. This is what it's supposed to be. Yeah.
And then, but interestingly enough, after the class was over, she called me aside and she said, I just want you to know you're really good at this. And I think you should, focus on Shakespeare as much as you can, because you've really got a gift for it, which terrified me. And I basically ran away from Shakespeare for about 12 years after that. So, which happens, because I knew it was good. I didn't understand why.
Right. As
a 60-year-old man, I look back and I know why. Right. But it was one of those extraordinary moments that, actors, that aha moments, like, aha, this is acting. I'm not sure why it is, but I'm acting.
Right. But you can feel it, and it is different.
You can feel it. It's very real.
Well, thankfully, you got over that and then did many productions with the Houston Shakespeare Festival and other plaplaces later.
Yes.
And Main Street Theater, of course. That goes without saying.
But Arthur, let me just kind of, because it's interesting. King John today on Facebook has been mentioned a couple of times in people's posts for the birthdays as a play that they don't know or not very familiar with. And I think it's kind of sad because it is not, there is a reason why it is not as well known as some of the other plays. It does not hang together as a complete play the way the great plays do. But broken down into scenes and monologues, it is an actor's dream, because it's just chock full of these great monologues and scenes, and just Ruddy did a terrific job directing. We had a blast, and I had a crown. But that's an old story.
Is that a story for another time? Okay, all right. We'll have to get that behind the scenes afterwards. I'll just share that when I share the photos of the folio that are coming from the museum.
But anyway, to sort of catch you up to what's happening in this scene, Arthur has been, King John realizes Arthur is a threat. He is a legitimate heir to the throne. And this is all true. All of this actually happened. This man, Hubert, who had been a companion of Arthur's, was coerced into taking him away to kill him, but he couldn't do it. So Arthur escaped, and they're not exactly sure when he died or how, but they speculate that King John himself found him and imprisoned him and killed him in a drunken stupor one night. He was a charming king, but it's I love it because it is so active. It's an active monologue, and because there's so much at stake.
Everything is at stake. Well, with that, we won't come at you with a pen, but take us there.
Have you the heart? When your head did but ache, I knit my handkerchief about your brow. The best I had, a princess wrought it me, and I did never ask it you again. And with my hand at midnight held your head, and like the watchful minutes to the hour, still and anon cheered up the heavy time, saying, what lack you, or where lies your grief? Or what good love may I perform for you? Many a poor man's son would lie and still, and ne'er have spoke a loving word to you. But you, at your sick service, had a prince. Nay, you may think my love is crafty love, and call it cunning. Do, and if you will, if heaven be pleased that you must use me ill, why then you must. Will you put out mine eyes? These eyes that never did nor never shall so much as frown on you. Oh, none but in this iron age would do it. The iron of itself, though heat red hot, approaching near these eyes, would drink my tears and quench his fiery indignation even in the matter of mine innocence. Nay, after that, consume away in rust, but for containing fire to harm mine eye. Are you more stubborn hard than hammered iron? And if an angel had come to me and told me Hubert should put out mine eyes, I would not have believed him. No tongue but Hubert's.
Well, I cannot think of a more powerful way to end our evening tonight. But before we go, I want to say thank you certainly right now to Joel, but to all of our extraordinary artists. I hope you know how much we value you and how much you matter and how much the work you do matters. And again, that we are all here tonight to celebrate Shakespeare 457 years later and to explore some of these words that maybe we never got to do as actors, but they're still part of our hearts and they move us. Maybe we have gotten to do them and we're revisiting them. And for some of us, learning new ones that we have not delved into before is a true privilege. And I am extraordinarily grateful as well to the over 100, and we've had about 130 people on this evening who said, yes, I'm in and I want to explore this further with you. And that's why we do theater. Any of you who know me have heard me say it a million times and I'll say it again. Theater is about human connection. That's the whole point. And we come together to walk around in each other's shoes, and we can't do this, just as Reddy so beautifully pointed out, we can't do this without you, and we wouldn't want to do this without you. So even though we're separated by a screen right now, I don't know, to me, it's still so potent and palpable. And with any luck this fall, we will be in a room together safely. But in the meantime, I thank you. I don't have an actual glass, but I raise a glass. Yes, if you have one, raise it to say thank you, William Shakespeare, for what you gave the world. Thank you to these artists who gave of themselves to give us some Shakespeare. Thank you to Museum of Fine Arts and Rienzi, and especially Ryan and John Evans for taking us inside an extraordinary piece of history. Only a couple hundred of them left in the world. That is just remarkable. And thank you most of all to our audience this evening. Without you, we would not be here. I would be remiss if I did not say that if you enjoyed this evening, we would be grateful for any form of support you can give. If you can't, that's okay too. Your main support is being here. But should you wish to make a contribution this evening, I have just dropped our donation link in the chat, and I will once again put the link to Rienzi in the chat. It is well worth a visit or 5. Every time I go, I see something new. So thank you all so much. This has been a true joy. It was fun to come back tonight for this special 4th edition of BYOBard, and have a good evening, a wonderful rest of Shakespeare's birthday, and we hope to see you soon at the theater. Thank you, everyone.